Welcome to I Just Don't Know, a podcast where we learn something new, challenge opinions, and hope to make the misinformed informed. I can openly say I've spoken when I did not need to, been unnecessarily controversial, and shared my misinformed opinion, thinking it was not. In this podcast, I'll try to right some wrongs and take on a new topic each episode that I think I knew, but in fact, I just don't know. This episode is all about this, pretty much. What you're listening to right now. The great medium of listening to just voice. No other distractions, just a single voice that you can hear about an idea, a new topic that you've never discovered before, talking about anything you like, listening with no distractions. That is, of course, podcasting. I decided myself about 4 or 5 weeks ago, rather than listening to many hours of podcasting each week, why don't I actually just join this bandwagon and get involved? And I'm really excited to try and give this a go. It's not something I have got any experience in doing. I've listened to probably at least 1,000 hours over the last 4 or 5 years since I discovered sort of produced podcasting, listening to others talk about rubbish at times, or it could be just talking about some really interesting things, well produced, set up by something like the BBC, or set up by comedians that I really like. But overall, I love the medium of podcasting. I think it's the best way to get any idea across, being able to talk it through, have that time where each person has a go to speak what they want to say with no sort of distractions of being there in person necessarily, or having to, you're able to listen to it attentively and not have to watch it with others with all the production around it. But focus on podcasting specifically. I just love that you always learn something or you relate to something, and it's sometimes passive. You can listen to it while you don't really know sort of what you're listening to, but you are listening to it, and you can do something else at the same time. But you are enjoying it, and you learn to listen, and that's why I do love podcasting. And I know TV is very popular, and you can get really engrossed in TV shows, and it's really enjoyable. But you either watch TV or you sit there on your phone, you don't really realize what you're watching, and you're not really engrossed. The beauty of podcasting is that you can be listening to it, but you can also be doing other things as well. And I feel like back in the day, people used to listen to radio a lot more, and this is basically something similar. And that's why I love podcasts, and I can't believe I'm trying to record this right now, and I'm trying to get involved and join this world. I'm going to give it a go. Starting this podcast, I thought of the idea inspired by a voice note sent to me by my best mate back home, taking the mick or joking around about this phrase, I just don't know, that I really did used to say quite a lot when I was younger. When I, especially talking to him, when we would talk about a debate that we didn't really know the topic, you were pretending to know some things, you're a teenager, you don't want to look like you're stupid. But I more used it as a way of winding him up and infuriating him, and by just stopping that, stopping the conversation in its tracks, because you can't debate something if you have no facts or you have no knowledge of the topic. But it's surprising as I've grown up, that people still do that, especially when they've had a few drinks. So it's really interesting that podcasting sort of allows that exploration of topics, even if you don't really know them. And I hope if anyone listens to this, that they learn something. As I said earlier, that we will be trying to learn something new about something that we thought we already knew about. And in this case, talking about podcasting that I think I know a lot about because I've listened to it a lot and I try different types of podcasts. I love the Joe Rogan Experience, of course, is the largest one in the world by many people's opinion. My other favourites are Off Menu, Ed Gamble and James Acaster. Love that, especially when I'm a bit hungry, or it definitely makes me hungry anyway. And I know that's sort of come to the sort of the top podcast in the UK. And then you have Elizabeth Day's How to Fail. That's definitely one of my favourites. Some great guests on that and some really deep conversations about some really interesting experiences and failures as they go through. They're just a few podcasts that I just love listening to, and I just really want to try and get involved in the same sort of thing and try and create anything close to that sort of level. It's very exciting to try. So as you can hear, I think I know a lot about podcasting, or I think I have a lot of experience listening to podcasting. But what about podcasting itself? What about actually setting up a podcast? So we're going to talk about a little bit about those two areas. Firstly, though, podcasting itself. The history of podcasting is it's a mixed one, but supposedly it dates back to the 1980s. Podcasting, the term is debated when that started, but I think originally you could argue they were called audio blogs, according to this source here, and supposedly there were podcasts or audio blogs available on iPods from the internet as early as sort of 2004, 2003. I've heard that it was started by the first sort of podcast, you could argue, was started by a professor in I think Cambridge University, and he was trying to sort of record a number of lectures for students, and the students can use them later on. But where that actually started, it looks like that obviously the World Wide Web, the internet helped the transmission of sort of audio files, sort of accelerated that growth. So it's very interesting here as well. The RSS feed that we'll talk about later on was sort of, looks like it was set up in sort of the early noughties or 2000 by sort of the big sort of tech guys over in the US. Looks like the most sort of recognizable and popular podcast that was sort of recorded and sent round was, in fact, the Ricky Gervais show from sort of 2011 and 2009, 10, 11, where they recorded it through Audible, and you actually pay for it an episode at a time. But I have to be honest, I didn't actually listen to the Ricky Gervais show. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Ricky Gervais and what they've set up. But I know I've seen bits of it on obviously YouTube and things like that. Some of the great chats that he had with Stephen Merchant and the Idiot Broadstar. What's his name again? Carl Pilkington, not Tim. Thinking of someone else. The Ricky Gervais show, that seems to be a very popular one in the UK. Looks like there was a lot of others in the US that were hugely popular here. The Adam Carolla show, and they did a weekly podcast starting in 2009 and became huge by 2011. And so that looks like to be a very, very big podcast. But I think the one that most people would hear if they started to listen to podcasts around the time that I discovered them was around 2014-15 is a Serial that some of you might have heard of. It's a very interesting podcast very popular, probably one of the most famous. A lot of people were very confused about its name. I remember it's because it's called Serial, so everyone thought you were talking about the food, but it's a really interesting investigative journalist podcast, narrated story, effectively non-fiction story over multiple episodes, and really, really well done. Sets that sort of whole genre and sets the bar pretty high. And it says, as of September 2018, the episode 1 and 2 have been downloaded 340 million times, which is a podcast world record. So Serial is the king and queen of the podcast world in terms of downloads at the moment. So pretty impressive, pretty incredible. So it's only 3 seasons, with 32 episodes. So in a nutshell, it's just a great bit of production. But overall, it looks like, talking of king and queen of the podcast world, it looks like it's very difficult to know who exactly is the best, or who has the most number of downloads. Because I think nowadays it's all about streaming. It says here, so Serial, yes, might have 420 million downloads, and Ricky Gervais' show might have 300 million back in 2011. But there is one here, Stuff You Should Know, which is a very good podcast everyone should listen to. I've listened to a few times, some great episodes on that. Has over 1 billion downloads. And you have obviously the Joe Rogan Experience that I mentioned before. And there is an argument that he receives over 200 million downloads a month for across all the episodes. So that obviously would surpass Gervais's 300 very quickly. So very, very difficult to know who is the best, how to measure it, if anyone was wondering. According to Nielsen's report a couple of years ago, there are around 700,000 active podcasts worldwide. That's probably a lot more now, probably sort of 1 million podcasts, I reckon. And it says here in 2020, 24% of Americans listen to podcasts weekly. 32% of Americans listen to podcasts in the last month. And it looks like here we go. As of earlier this year in 2021, there are more than 1.7 million shows with nearly 44 million episodes. That's pretty impressive. But then we'll cover this perhaps in a bit. But let's get down to the real stuff, the money. Advertising revenues will surpass $1 billion as of 2021 for podcasting as a whole. So there is a little bit of money in podcasting, and it will grow for those that are successful, for those that are actually making some really high quality stuff that is very popular with the masses. Maybe they are a big name already. Maybe they have sort of a following on YouTube or something like that, or Instagram. If you start a podcast and you get your followers to do it, there's some good revenue in it. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. It is very early days when it comes to podcasting. So that actually takes me nicely to, what are the benefits of podcasting? We'll touch on the money in a bit, but I think for me, as I said earlier, I really enjoy it, being able to listen to a podcast while doing something else, learning something new, learning about someone that you had never heard of before, learning about a topic, learning more about a celebrity that you thought you knew. You've seen them on TV, you've seen them in films, but in reality, they've had a very, very interesting or difficult upbringing. And what you find out from them opening up on a podcast is so much more than you would get in a TV interview. You get to really see the personal nature of some of these celebrities. So it's really opened my eyes about some people. I think the most recent one I listened to was Holly Willoughby on How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. And it was so interesting and eye-opening and enjoyable and sad at times and happy as well to hear about how she has just managed to get to the top of daytime TV, the top of ITV pretty much. She's one of the most loved people in the country. And I wouldn't really have ever got that if I'd watched 100 episodes of This Morning. So it's just so great to get that access on a podcast. But that's rather than me assuming things, as I said. I think I know about podcasting and the benefits of it, but let's see what it says here from an interesting article that I found earlier. So first off, podcasts are personal, and I would agree with that. And they are indeed very personal. If people start opening up and the right questions are asked, it makes it incredibly intimate. I think, especially when you're just listening to someone's voice, there's no production around it. There's no anything to look at. There's no distractions about what you perceive by what you see, and ultimately it's very personal. So I would agree with that. As a product, if we think commercially here, it's very easy to consume. I would mostly agree with that, and as you can listen to it in the car, on the commute, even cycling for some. But overall, it's just listening, isn't it? So, and there are lots of distribution apps, and you've got Apple, you've got Spotify now growing. It's library of podcasts. I use Acast as well. That's a great app as well that I recommend anyone to use. The next one here, podcasts cut costs. That is a very interesting point. As you could call it, the barriers to entry, or how to set up a podcast, is a lot less than if someone wanted to have their own TV show. You can set up your podcast in literally your bedroom, at home, anywhere. And I think in throughout lockdown, that was very popular. What I'm doing here, I am trying to start from scratch with very basic equipment, trying to just make something. And with not many costs spent, I've spent very little on this so far. I've given myself a rule. I've got to make at least 10 episodes that are average to okay before I start investing any more money into it. And it's going to just start as a hobby and see where it goes from there. It's another point here. It's podcasting is a time efficient form of communication. I could argue that is that is true. You can listen and be active in other ways, and you can be productive in some ways and learn something from the podcast. So yeah, similar to what I was saying earlier, podcasting is in demand. It's a technology, or it's a form of that people want to try and listen to. I think more and more people are being sort of introduced to podcasting every day, and it's really, I think a really good question to ask is sort of, how would you describe a podcast to someone who has never heard of them before? Really good question. I think the key ones here to follow, and the key points that you could use. So maybe this Christmas, a family member asks, what is a podcast? Well, the key areas are: it's free, it's on demand, it can be niche on a certain topic, and it's effectively talk radio. It's all about talking. It's all about breaking down ideas, breaking down topics, getting to know each other, getting to know the host, getting to know the guest, and sharing that with all the listeners. I think we've got here that, so to sort of step up my clumsy attempt to define a podcast. Here it says, it's all your favorite blogs, shows, and topics some you didn't even know you'd enjoy, wrapped up in a huge hub of recordings that you can explore, download, and listen to on your own time. In the car, at work, at home, working out, anywhere. If you can Google it, there's probably a podcast about it. So I agree with that. I think there aren't as many podcasts as people think. I think there's nowhere near as many podcasts compared to YouTube channels or Instagram accounts or Facebook pages. Podcasting is still relatively new. Not many people do it. A lot of celebrities do it for a bit. Some comedians do it quite regularly because it's a great sort of support to their sort of mainstream stand-up. But overall, I think there is a lot more podcasting to be done by other people, by regular people. I really think that. It doesn't have to be a race to have the next TV show. I think podcasting is available to anyone. Here we are. So let's get down to sort of the actual definition of a podcast, if anyone asks. So it's a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So yes, that is what a podcast is exactly, according to the internet. So the next area we're going to look at is how to set up a podcast. And this is something I've been looking at for the last 3 to 4 weeks. And I've been excited when I finally decided, let's actually get involved and do this. But overall, it is really interesting to see how simple it is to set up a podcast. There are a number of great YouTube channels out there that I've used to sort of give me some hints and tips. In particular, How to Start a Podcast by B&H Photo Video. They were really interesting, covering lots of different technology that you can get, sort of affordable budget, but also really expensive, sort of top quality stuff. They're not super expensive, but the best stuff out there. Also, Pat Flynn, you might have seen on YouTube. He is really interesting, and I've actually just seen a video saying, watch this before starting a podcast, which I haven't watched, so maybe I should have. And this episode is going to be absolutely horrendous to re-listen to or for anyone to listen to, but hey, you've got to start somewhere, I suppose. But these guys and a few others have been really great to just watch, and they really break down how to start a podcast in terms of the equipment and software. And I will be listening and watching a number of them about how to edit this podcast and put it together in one piece. So yeah, there's some great channels, and there's loads on YouTube to help someone. In terms of the actual content of a podcast, having an idea, I didn't really have an idea of how to start a podcast. I just was in a interesting place, sort of difficult place, to be honest, about what was driving me. How can I be creative? How can I find that energy again? And listen to a podcast and thinking it through. And I think what was the key moment was you've got to just get involved and do it. Do the things you really enjoy to consume. And being a consumer is easy because there's constant content coming out, whether that's sport, Netflix, a new place to go out, and a new podcast to listen to. It's just consuming. It's like constant consuming. But I think from the past, when I actually got involved and did things before sort of work takes so much time, is that doing it and then sharing it with others while consuming at the same time, is so much better, so much more enjoyable. So I think, I don't know how and why it just switched, but I suddenly had the confidence, and I could probably put it down to the position I've slowly built myself in, the world opening up a bit. I just went, what am I doing? Let's just get involved and do it. And it's like the going traveling on your own feeling. It's like going to that place that normally you wouldn't go to, or that energy you suddenly get. Yes, let's just do it. Give it a go. You never know what's going to happen. And so I didn't really have a key idea. I really want to do a podcast with other people and with guests, and I've shared this idea with some of my friends, some close friends, and they're sort of really supportive, and they've given my sort of confidence that this is worth trying and should give it a go. Hopefully one day they'll be on this podcast as well, and they can share their thoughts and ideas on something that I just don't know as well, that I thought I knew. But before that, I'm going to have to build up some sort of foundation and start somewhere and go and learn by doing. I can't just sit there and watch YouTube videos forever. I think because there is so much content out there and so accessible in terms of videos in YouTube, short 10-minute snaps and clips, it's very easy to watch things, say, oh, that would be good, and then you never really do them. Or you use it in the moment you need it, but you don't learn it. You don't really master it, master a craft. And I'm not saying I'm going to become a master podcaster, but I want to get good and better at all aspects of it, from the setting it up, the content itself, the production, the technology. But going back to the moment about 4 weeks ago where I was like, I'm going to do this and give this a go. I didn't really have an idea, so I've had to start from scratch and working it through and talking to my friends about what I enjoy, what do I like talking about. Reminiscing is and being able to know when something happened in a certain date is very, very me. But I needed to have it so there was a bit of freedom, but still gave me a focus for each episode. And so after a bit of time, a bit of thoughts going on, sort of brainstorming walks and runs, I just don't know. Luckily, was inspired by that voice recording that I got from my mate, and taking the joking around and taking the mickey out of what I used to do when I was younger. So luckily that gave me that inspiration, and I sort of built something around it. And I'm hoping that this podcast is the beginning. It needs refinement. I get that. It needs improving and building on, but it's a start. And I hope I get the benefits of the many hours of podcasts I've listened to over the years, but tenfold, by actually hosting it myself. A podcast where I try to correct myself and make myself more informed. I love to learn. I'm very curious about different things and learning the sort of ins and outs of different areas, especially geography, history, and the different politics in different regions of the world. But I do definitely make assumptions. And if I can learn something either through my own self-learning and sharing it with you, and ideally in the future with a guest, someone who is an expert or has experience in something that I've never had, I will be able to learn something that I really want to do. So that's where the content of a podcast does become a bit difficult. And this idea is, it's open-ended. It gives you a general overview, but I think it's okay. I think others might disagree. It needs to be more focused and specific. I think the most successful podcasts out there are very specific, but I think the medium of podcasting and talk radio, as I mentioned earlier, and how this article described it, doesn't need too much focus, because at the end of the day, it's just people talking with each other, and it just needs a general structure to give it that sort of focus and area of interest for other people. So in this case, I'm just a normal guy in London trying to learn something and become a better person from it, and try and correct some of the assumptions that I might have. And so I think it should work. We will see. So that is what I've been doing in terms of setting up a podcast. In terms of the benefits I mentioned earlier, there is the one bit missed out on the article over there that I mentioned earlier is the money. There is advertisement revenue, and it's much like almost you could say the YouTube hype of probably the last 10 years, less so in the last 3, as YouTube has really cracked down on sort of what content they're allowing. You have to be very sort of sensitive now on YouTube of what you say if you want to have the adverts that generate the revenue that you're looking for. But I've used to follow YouTubers that probably got all their revenue from their YouTube channel and had many subscribers over the years. I think they started literally doing basic stuff from putting makeup on or sharing something about their life and just sort of sharing stuff. I think the one that I listened to and discovered about 4 years ago that I think was really important to me, and that sharing of someone also struggling meant a lot to me, was the Hannah Witten YouTube channel that I think is pretty sort of very quiet at the moment. I think she's really progressed into a professional journalist and author, and good for her, to be honest. I think she's around the same age as me, starting her YouTube channel when she was just before she went to university, I think. Good for her. But YouTube is not a platform that is that friendly anymore for people. So it's you are at the mercy of YouTube. So podcasting, you obviously create it. You have to sort of distribute it via a podcasting hosting service to get your RSS feed. And through that, you share it through whatever platform you want: Spotify, Apple, Acast, and all the others. So we will see where the podcasting world goes in terms of money. There's a lot of growth, I think, but if the ownership stays with the people that make the podcasts, then that's great. And I really hope it stays like that. I think we will see what happens. I think the move of Joe Rogan's podcast to Spotify as a exclusive deal and taking his content, his full episodes off YouTube, I think was a good idea. Spotify is a company that is more focused. It's not got the responsibility of running the biggest search engine in the world while trying to manage the biggest video search website in the world with Google and YouTube. So I think we will see where it goes, but a very interesting topic. And then now this is touching on my work that I'm sure I'll share with you in the future. But yeah, the commercial side of things, investment and the money in podcasting, I think can only go upwards. It's in their very early stages, and we will see where it goes. I think I need to wrap up this first attempt of a podcast episode. I've learned some interesting things here. Ricky Gervais' show, Serial, 2 biggest podcasts back in the day. You've got a lot of others of What You Need to Know and Joe Rogan Experience are just killing it now every month with millions and millions of downloads, and that's incredible. And it shows there is a appetite for thousands, millions of people out there across the world that want to enjoy the many benefits of a podcast. And if we go back to the benefits of a podcast, how it's free, it's on demand, you can have it whenever you want. It can be niche on specific topics, and effectively it can cover all sorts of great things. And personally, it has been one of my most enjoyable bits of entertainment that I've had in the last 5 years, surpassing anything from surpassing sort of gaming, and gaming is always great, surpassing sort of TV, I'd say, with too much. It's way too much on TV, but podcasting truly is the best the best thing. We've also learned that the first they used to be called audio blogs, available on an iPod, and it was used by sort of professors in higher education. Video podcasting, which we didn't talk about a huge amount, but they became very popular and started in 2004, so around the same time as podcasting itself, filming podcasts. It's pretty interesting how it is not that long ago, really not that long ago, that podcasting really kicked off. And there aren't many other industries out there that are that recent. Technology, of course, is always changing. There's new industries that developed by that, but are they attracting $1 billion worth of investment? Some, probably. But again, I'm making assumptions here, and this podcast here is to try and stop me from doing that too often. But overall, I think it's podcasting really is the great thing. And if you're listening to this all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. And I think I've learned a few bits here. So it's particularly about podcasting and its benefits and its history, with regards to the sort of 10 years ago and 15 years ago, but also just thinking about it as a medium. It is podcasting is a great way of consuming information, but you're in control. And in a time where information is everywhere, you need to be able to control that flow of information. So I think it's great. So to wrap it up, please try and be open to learning a new topic, like we're trying to do in this episode. If you want, please like this episode. Contact me if you have any ideas of other episodes. I have a few sort of lined up for this first season. I'm very excited to record those as well. Thanks so much. If you've listened to this, you're sharing the first time with me. Bye, everyone.